Fluency, RF 3.4b, reading prose and poetry with accuracy, appropriate rate, and expression on successive readings. According to Fontes and Pinnell, there are 6 dimensions of fluency: pausing, phrasing, stress, intonation, rate, integration. When all dimensions of fluency are working together, the reader will be using expressions in a way that clearly demonstrates that he is understanding the text and is even thinking beyond the text. Fluent reading develops when students experience expert modeling, levels of support that gradually move toward independence, and by providing many opportunities over time to practice reading. When students read too slowly, stop to work out words, and take long pauses, they tend to have difficulty comprehending the text. Fluency is not a stage of development at which readers can read all words quickly and easily. Fluency changes depending on certain variables. Fluency is not a stage of development at which readers can read all words quickly and easily. Fluency changes depending on certain variables: what readers are reading, their familiarity with the words, and the amount of their practice when reading text. Even very skilled readers may read in a slow, labored manner when reading text with many unfamiliar words or topics. We must always keep understanding and thinking at the forefront of our reading instruction. In this lesson, the focus will be on reading accurately with appropriate rate and expression, with the understanding that these dimensions must be taught with equal emphasis to help students integrate the other dimensions of fluency to become skilled, independent readers and thinkers. Tim Rosinski's research highlights how fluency impacts comprehension. Fluency is important because it provides a bridge between word recognition and comprehension. Because fluent readers don't have to concentrate on decoding the words, they can focus their attention on what the text means, can make connections among the ideas in the text, and draw from background knowledge. Accuracy, rate, and expression are key dimensions of fluency. Reading rate refers to the pace at which the reader moves accurately through the text, not too fast and not too slow. Expression, or intonation, refers to the way the reader varies their voice in tone, pitch, and volume to reflect the meaning of the text. Evidence of sound comprehension is when a reader is able to independently match their rate and expression to the author's message. This lesson will highlight for students the critical role accuracy, rate, and expression play in understanding prose and poetry. This lesson is 45 to 50 minutes. It can be done in a large or small group format with minimal modifications. This lesson assumes that student fluency levels are varied, and students should have some basic experience with punctuation and its purpose. Using rubrics is helpful but not necessary, and it also assumes that students are able to work in partnerships. Materials needed for this lesson include students having self-selected poetry books, poetry poems from home, copies, anything from the class library that is of their choice. A classroom library of poems from a variety of sources, such as poems published in magazines, poetry anthologies, copies of poems, even selections from former students work best. Copies of poems that meet the demands of your small groups, if you plan to work with small groups during the practice time. A document camera, simply for modeling and enlarging text so that all students can see when you're modeling. Your conferring notebook for recording observations of student learning throughout the practice time is really important. Fluency rubric of your choice, there are a couple options that are available: MLPP or the 6 dimensions of fluency rubric. And a student-friendly rubric is not mandatory, but it's recommended. You can create your own, or you might choose to use Kirsten Hauser's rubrics as a possible option. Take a look at those. They're linked on the lesson plan. The explicit instruction sequence is critical. The students need to understand how today's lesson fits with yesterday's learning. Research tells us there's a greater impact in learning when students have an understanding of what it is they need to know and be able to do. Be sure students understand why this lesson lives in your classroom today. Here are some possible statements for the explicit instruction segment. The modeling part of the lesson requires the teacher to be the expert in the room and model a guided strategy practice. Do one example on your own while students watch. Select a piece of poetry that'll be engaging and also provide you with opportunities to explicitly show how you make decisions while reading poetry. For example, where in the poem it's necessary to slow down, where you change your voice, if you read fast or slow, etc. Be sure that all students can see the text for the modeling. Use a document camera or enlarge your text to fit on chart paper if needed. Remember that modeling for students makes our words visible and our actions the exact model we're seeking to notice in our students' reading. Introduce the fluency rubric so students know the reading behaviors of a proficient, fluent reader before you model. We always want students to know what is expected of them before moving into practice. Read the poem while using your pointer finger to match your reading to the words. Then move to the rubric and think aloud as you score yourself. Be sure to go back to the text and point out the cues you use to make your decisions. This is the time when you might share how your brain told you to make an adjustment to your voice or the pace of your reading. The focus on that read was to get the gist of the poem. Then, tell students you're going to reread and notice the spacing and punctuation and share how that helps you know how to read the poem. Think aloud for students. After your second read, revisit the rubric. Point out your improvements on the rubric and then reread the poem a third time to put it all together. Revisit the rubric a third time, and this time allow students to contribute to scoring on the rubric. Celebrate that you made improvements every time. The active engagement segment is the time The active engagement segment, I can hear her down there and it's going to pick it up. The active engagement segment is the time for you to allow students the opportunity to walk through the same process you just modeled with guidance and support. I can hear that. The active engagement segment is the time for you to allow students the opportunity to walk through the same process you just modeled with guidance and support. Students can audition with their thoughts and ideas. Students can audition their thoughts and ideas before going off to work independently. This is an important element in the gradual release process. Remember that students need time to process their thinking. Using the same poem, divide the group into two groups. The first group will read the first stanza. Then, group 2 will read the second stanza. Repeat the process to the end of the poem. Then repeat it again so students are reading the same passages, and go to the rubric each time and have students turn with their neighbor and rate the fluency of their group. If there's time, read through the stanzas in the same manner and revisit the rubric again. Be sure to share that with each rereading, fluency strengthens. The link and launch is a brief reminder of the learning objective. This sets students off to work with purpose for their practice time. This practice time can be done in partnerships or independently. You decide what's best for your students. Here is one way you might link and launch students to practice. The practice time is an opportunity for you to watch students in action. By moving around the room and conferring with individuals or small groups, you can collect evidence to share at the end of the lesson. This is the time for you to record notes on how students are doing with reading poetry with accuracy, appropriate rate, and expression. This is where the students will show you where you need to go next with your instruction. This is where the students will show you where you need to go next with instruction. Sharing the learning that happened during practice time helps to reinforce the lesson objective in a meaningful way. Sharing can be done in a variety of ways based on the amount of time left in your schedule. Some options to consider. Highlight one student that made adjustments with their fluency and how it helped build their understanding. You might invite one student to share what was discussed in your conference time. You could allow students to share in partnerships what was learned for the day, and you move around and listen in and record sound bites. Another option is exit slips. You can use that to reflect on the learning. Ask the question, what did you learn about yourself today as a reader? This will give you insights from every student. Here's an example of how you might wrap up the lesson. A formative assessment process in place helps you determine what your students need next. Here are some suggestions for collecting student learning before, during, and after the lesson. Within the lesson plan, you'll find helpful links to recommended resources for additional routines, small group instruction suggestions, and short articles to deepen your understanding of fluency instruction and the research-based methods for developing confident, passionate, and fluent readers. Also in the lesson plan, you'll find suggested student resources that offer reading passages for practice and suggested methods for students to track their fluency growth over time. Here are the reading standards that are addressed in this lesson.